My initial thought, and the one spoiler in my review after all the hoopla surrounding Queer as Folk's casting of queer roles with queer performers, why is Kim Cattrall playing a queer person on Queer as Folk? She's not queer. Why wasn't a queer person cast as Brenda, like all of the other major roles? Where is Sandra Caldwell, or Candace Cain, or Laverne Cox, or Kate McKinnon, or Wanda Sykes, or Portia de Rossi? The character of Brenda is described as a martini-soaked, high society Southern debutante with trailer park roots. That's a pretty basic stereotype. What Brenda's character description doesn't say, and this is my one big spoiler, Brenda is queer. The producers have some explaining to do. Kim Cattrall is not queer, and her character's coming out story is a big part of the plot. It's also very self-serving and comically untethered to reality. Did Brenda become queer before or after Kim Cattrall was cast? In contrast, Juliette Lewis plays Mingus's mom to perfection. Her character supports her queer child's story beautifully. She doesn't need to come out or sing a song in the climactic 7th episode. So when did the character of Brenda become queer? And if the character was always queer, why wasn't Sandra Caldwell or Candace Cain or Laverne Cox or Kate McKinnon or Wanda Sykes or Portia de Rossi cast? Inquiring minds want to know, Stephen Dunn. Hey y'all, I'm Wilson Peak, and I hope the day is treating you well. Is Stephen Dunn's Queer as Folk a vibrant reimagining of the groundbreaking British series? Or more like the precocious, milquetoast gay yuppies of Pittsburgh in the American version? Aside from Kim Cattrall's newfound queerness, this is a spoiler-free review. I'll discuss the story, break down the actors' performances, and hopefully help you decide whether the new Queer as Folk is worth your time and money. Stephen Dunn's Queer as Folk is inclusive, brightly colored, pop culture infused, and far superior to both the original and the American reboot. But I must inform you, I hated both of those shows and did not finish any season of either. The UK version was very sexy in the first episode, but ultimately I was not obsessed after all the baby drama. The US version was never ever ever sexy. It was set in Pittsburgh. Gay yuppies with babies in Pittsburgh. And even though I am a white, gay, cisgender gym rat daddy, I did not relate to that version on any level. I was still proudly serving 90s era grunge. And here suddenly were these precocious, gay yuppies in Pittsburgh. It was my nightmare. Needless to say, I approached Stephen Dunn's version with trepidation. Their version centers on a much more diverse group of friends in New Orleans, dealing with the aftermath of a Pulse nightclub-style shooting, which propels the action. First, the Pulse-like nightclub shooting is such a monumental, horrific event. 49 people were murdered. Unfortunately, the tragedy is not used effectively. It's still effective, but to truly honor the victims of the Pulse nightclub shooting, I believe we as viewers really needed to get to know and care about these characters a little more before the event occurs. I wish they had waited a few episodes. The nightclub shooter could have been introduced in the shadows early on to illustrate the pervasive sense of death that lurks around every corner for the trans community, especially trans people of color. Having the massacre occur in the very first episode dilutes the opportunity to illustrate that fear. And a first episode massacre is not much of a cliffhanger. That would never have happened on Dynasty. I was also very disappointed to discover that the queers having babies storyline was still intact. I groaned. We all know how baby storylines go. Predictable, boring, lots of crying. Why do they have to keep the babies? What is cool is that this version of Queer as Folk does create a very strong sense of family with the other characters without babies, which I think should be the whole point of the first few seasons of Queer as Folk. The strongest sense of family comes from Finn Argus as Mingus and their two mothers, Juliette Lewis as Judy, their biological mother, and Armand Fields as Bussy, their drag mother. I truly adored the performances of all three. Their scenes really sparkled, and Mingus's drag performances are truly RuPaul's Drag Race worthy. The biggest moments of the season for me were between Mingus, Judy, and Bussy. They brought me to big tears. You realize just how young and vulnerable trans children are. And despite being handed some very clunky dialogue, writers, I'm looking at you. Despite being handed some very clunky dialogue, Juliette Lewis imbues every one of her scenes with spontaneity and soul. I immediately thought of the vulnerability she displayed in her breakout role in Cape Fear. She's a fearless actor. However, the star of Queer as Folk is Devin Way as Brody, and his is definitely a breakout performance and one I totally adored. Devin Way's Brody is sly, super sexy with a heart of gold, but he's also got some rather fatal flaws. His best friend Ruthie tells Brody in a moment of anger that he is a selfish, self-destructive narcissist with an unending need for validation. Ouch, that hits close to home. Brody returns to New Orleans in episode 1 after dropping out of med school, to the dismay of his father, played by Ed Begley Jr., and Kim Cattrall as his mother, Brenda. Now, I love Kim Cattrall, the actress, ever since Mannequin, and initially I totally enjoyed her presence as Brody and Julian's mother, and she's absolutely touching in some scenes. But then all of a sudden, her character literally takes center stage in episode 7. Her coming out party is the dumbest, most ridiculous scene in all of season 1. I instantly thought of the Kids in the Hall's Brain Candy, when the dad comes out of the closet and sings, "I'm gay." Except in Brain Candy, everyone already knew that Dad was gay. That was the joke. In Stephen Dunn's Queer as Folk, there is zero context for Brenda's coming out of the closet. Brenda has raised 2 gay sons, and in all that time, 25 years, in all that time, she has never once considered that she may be a lesbian. Not once, in 25 years. This is why I believe her coming out was written into the show after Kim Cattrall joined the cast, and not a part of the original concept, because why wouldn't Stephen Dunn hire a queer person to play the part of Brenda if Brenda had been written as queer from the very beginning? Sandra Caldwell would have been amazing, and she could have brought extreme depth to the role of Brenda. She could have been a trans woman in hiding, and she could have had 2 adopted children, and she could have disclosed that she's trans in the climax. That's a storyline worthy of Queer as Folk, and it would have had simultaneously given a job to someone that truly deserves it, not someone who can afford to turn down easy Sex and the City money. I am super happy Kim Cattrall chose not to be in, and just like that, as someone with money, she was able to dodge a big bullet. But we took one. Her character has a huge queer dramatic arc, and she even gets to sing a song made famous by Liza Minnelli. Seriously, I want to know when Brenda became queer. As Brody's best friend Ruthie, Jesse James Keitel makes an instant impression. They give a super brave, truthful, funny performance, and one of the most clever devices of the show involves Ruthie, and took me too long to figure out. I kept hearing a word being bleeped out, and at first I thought it was a curse word, but then I realized they were bleeping out Ruthie's dead name. Now that's very clever, and so super duper thoughtful. In addition, Ruthie has some of the best dialogue in the series, and watching her mourn her life's new direction as a mother, miserable between 2 crying babies, they were absolutely hilarious. A perfectly realized performance. As beleaguered pregnant non-binary partner Shar, CG brings great wit, humor, and compassion to the role. They are the kind of person who doesn't hold a grudge, but will definitely let you know when you fucked up. I would love Shar as a friend. Johnny Sibley plays Brody's ex Noah, and his is a deeply felt performance. And last but definitely not least is Brody's sardonic brother Julian, played by Ryan O'Connell. In a word, Ryan O'Connell is electric. He's perfectly cast, and I found his performance here versus in his series, Special, much more truthful and accessible. I did not love Special because I felt the truth was permanently candy-coated. The tone of Special did not appeal to me, which brings me to his work here as a writer. he's covering a lot of the same territory as Special. I wish he trusted his audience more. I wish he wasn't starting from scratch as a gay man in Queer as Folk. What if he was the expert doling out dating advice for others but unable to follow it? There seem to be a lot of writers on Queer as Folk, and I do believe the story suffers from the lack of a singular vision. In terms of the other actors, Eric Grays as Marvin has a very incisive way of delivering his lines. His Marvin cuts like a knife, but is equally as tender. I hope Marvin has an even bigger role in future seasons. And Sachin Bhatt brought a particular sweetness to his role, and you can instantly understand why he would be an awesome sex worker. He's a good listener. Chris Renfro shines as Daddius. I wish there were more of him. And a big shout out to Ali Hoskivi as George in episode 7. Your scream is to die for, and I look forward to seeing you in Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. Here's what I absolutely hated about Stephen Dunn's Queer as Folk. The repeated use of flashbacks, flash forwards, dream sequences, drug sequences, and dead people talking. All of these devices are lazy screenwriting habits, and they piss me off. And my least favorite episode features Brody and Ruthie and is told almost entirely in flashback with horrible wigs, giving us information we already know. It's super frustrating, as it would have been far more interesting had this information been given to us in the present without the shitty wigs. Which leads me to, why didn't the parade float move in episode 6? That looks ridiculous. And if the parade float could not move, then why wasn't that bit written into the script? If they all had to work together to push the parade float, that could have been really funny. For season 2, please narrow the focus and give some of these characters a rest. I would only bring back the characters and storylines of Ryan O'Connell as Julian, Eric Grays as Marvin, Armand Fields as Bussy, and Finn Argus as Mingus. Allow the other storylines to rest. Allow us to recover from Brenda's coming out party. I hate it, but I just do not know where the Shar, Ruthie, and Brenda relationship is headed. I feel like I can see the outcome miles and miles ahead, and I feel like we're going to watch them raise babies for many seasons. And I think that's been the problem with the Queer as Folk series from the beginning. The lesbians, or here the trans and non-binary characters, have been saddled with deadweight storylines. In every iteration of Queer as Folk, they've been forced to have babies. We will never be able to see these characters without baby drama, which is boring, and I believe ultimately hinders our understanding of them. It's also a little misogynist. I believe the friendship between Ruthie, Brody, and Shar would have been enough without the baby drama. Can you imagine if one of the characters on Girls had had a baby early in season 1? She would have been gone by season 2. Because raising babies is material more suited for a half-hour comedy. The focus for season 2 needs to be narrowed. Brody and Ruthie's storyline can now wait a season or 2. As a writer, I would be hard-pressed to find an interesting way to continue Brenda's storyline. The writers gave her nowhere to go. She could have spent a season mending her Republican ways, or getting rid of her guns, but she was a Democrat already, and she hates guns. And her queer revelation, that could have been doled out over seasons 2 and 3. There was so much good in this season, but it was also severely hindered by Brenda's most ridiculous coming out episode and karaoke song. Why wasn't this role given to Sandra Caldwell? It would have been so easy, and she could have made some money. I really want to know, was the character of Brenda queer before Kim Cattrall was cast? Because if she was, then why wasn't a queer performer cast? Inquiring minds want to know. I do hope there is a season 2, as I definitely think it's worth your time. I give Stephen Dunn's Queer as Folk 3.5 stars out of 5, and I really, really hope the mystery behind hiring Kim Cattrall as a queer character will be revealed. All right, y'all, until next time, always remember, living well is the best revenge.